I always expect things to explode. I don't know why. Here we go. The drum sander is finished. I know this because I am back introducing the video this time instead of forward introducing it. Here's how I got on. I mentioned in a previous video that I had a bit of play in the bearing. I have so little play that I tried to put a thin layer of sellotape around the shaft, and it made well, I couldn't get the bearing on with the sellotape, so there's no need to shim this. It's really quite solid. So, having got everything in place, it's now time to tighten up the grub screw. And what I'm going to do is mark where I've got that grub screw, so that if I ever have to take the bearing off, I can get it back in exactly the same position, just in case changing the position of the grub screw or the position of the bearing has any effect on how true the drum is. I should point out, by the way, there's a grub screw missing. I only have one grub screw on this side, but I think that's okay. And we tighten up the 2 grub screws on this side. I've so far created 3 collars, 3 shims out of this 0.2mm steel, and I'm finding it's easier to push them into the middle of the pulley rather than try and put them around the axle and then slide the pulley on. I've lined the pulleys up. It just happens that the width of my ruler lines up with the edge of the pulleys, both the top and the bottom. Yep, I think that's about right. So, and of course I think the pulley just moved. Yeah, I think that's okay. Don't know how accurately the pulleys have to be aligned, whether there's any tolerance there or whether it's just going to be a horrible mess, but we'll see. Seems to be some play in that pulley, but yeah, the pulley isn't centered. Pulley is out by maybe 1 millimeter. Don't know whether this is going to cause a lot of vibration. I wonder if I should try to shim it tighter. I've used my final piece of shim material to create a 4th collar. So there's almost 1 millimeter of material in there. And hopefully, yeah, that is quite a close fit. And I've got to make sure the collars stay put. That's pretty good, actually. That feels a lot better. So hopefully, when I tighten this up, it won't have the same amount of play this time. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Bit of a moment of truth now. Have I got enough slack to get the belt on? Yes. And actually, I wonder if I need a tensioner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a a bearing just here to tension the belt, but I'm going to see what that runs like without a tensioner, because that's certainly quite good, I think. You ready for this? This is the first startup ever. So do I actually need a tensioner? I'll just give you another view of that glorious moment. I was going to put a belt tensioner on. These are just a couple of skateboard bearings, a couple of small washers either side of the bearing, and then big washers either side, just in case the belt moved. The big washers probably aren't necessary. All bolted together, and then I just drill a hole through maybe here to provide a bit of tension. But actually, I think that's probably okay. So I'm going to leave the tensioner off for now. If I get desperate, I could always just put some extra washers underneath the motor, just to drop the motor a little bit. But I think we're okay. Just going to make a guard for the belt. I've very carefully clamped these in place just so I can measure the exact dimensions, and I'll cut this to shape. Yeah, I haven't quite worked out what shape to make it, to be honest. I was going to put circular caps on the end, but they don't need to be that long. Probably we'll see. There we go. Form to bend over, but hopefully it will end up in the same place. It's like bending guitar sides. Not bad. Obviously I could have done with a single piece of aluminium, but I was just using what was available locally. Now comes the messy bit. I've put some masking tape down, and I'm just going to burnish it in. Just make sure it sticks. Actually, I actually have a burnishing tool. So that will make sure that the masking tape doesn't lift. And if you haven't already guessed, I'm going to super glue some sandpaper onto the top of it. Should probably have used accelerant. It's going to stick. These clips which hopefully will hold that all in place. I might put a Jubilee clip on here because this will pretty much permanent, but the one that I really need to be temporary is at the other end for attaching to the dust collector. Yeah, I think it's working. So in theory, with sandpaper attached to the table, all we've got to do is carefully, very slowly tweak this up and let it sand itself and hope it doesn't explode. I always expect things to explode, I don't know why. Here we go. I'm going to take this apart and have a look how much it's done and to get an idea of how far to leave it, but I think this is going to take a while. All of the wood being taken off is here, and this end of the drum is warm and this end of the drum is cold. I think a little bit's been taken off here, but there's none being taken off at this end. So actually I'm just going to take a very slight amount off this this shim at this end. I've taken about 0.2 of a millimetre off that. It's very important to get the bearing back in the right place each time, because otherwise if it's any slightly twisted when the table's at an angle, you're going to change the thickness at this end. Moving it back this way will effectively increase the height of it. This bearing was getting a little bit warm, only this bearing, not the other one, so maybe it's a little bit lacking in grease, so let's see what I can do. Don't know how many pumps you should give it. Do I go until I can see grease coming out? There we go, the grease is. Let's just try that. Apparently you're supposed to bend it until it pops off, but there we go. Off camera I've packed out the other bearing, the one that wasn't overheating, and it seemed to take quite a lot of grease. I gave this a bit of a rotation and I've given this a second go just to make sure there's plenty of grease in there. Hopefully it won't overheat. I've got a noise from these bearings. Listen to this, see if you can hear like a train. Putting a load on, you can definitely hear the noise in the bearings. Listen. Definitely sounds as if there's something loose inside the bearings. But onwards, maybe I can get the bearings serviced somewhere. Let's carry on with the truing process. I love the level of fine control I've got over this. In contact with the drum. It's now only touching in the middle, it's just sanding there. I only did a very light pass on that, so just to see where it was touching. It's still not touching up here, but the fact it's touching in the middle I think is a good sign, because it would seem to be fairly even. It's slightly left of centre. Obviously this disc, for whatever reason, is a little bit wider than the others. So we'll carry on, see how far we can get. It's noticeable that as I raise it I'm getting this vibration, but as you can hear the drum is connecting in places, so it's not that it's vibrating, it's the fact the drum's uneven. So it's clearly a raised spot that's got to be sanded down. It's been running for 10 minutes and I'm getting 29.6 degrees on the bearing, so that's not too bad. It's slightly warm, but it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. And I don't think the noise is as bad either, so maybe somehow it's settling down with the new grease. That's a little warm, which is good. It shows where it's being sanded. It's very smooth along most of the drum. But the end here isn't being touched, so I suspect it's still not quite level with the table, but it is being sanded for most of its length, so I think I'm happy with that. If this is very slightly conical, it's not the end of the world. Okay, change of tactics with the truing of the drum, because I was putting the sandpaper on the steel of the bed. And the problem with that is you only get a thin line of sandpaper being used right down the middle, and it's just taking ages. I was also using 60 grit, and I'm going to go up to 40 grit, or down to 40 grit. So I'm going to glue this using masking tape and super glue onto a backing board and then feed that in through the sander. I'm going to burnish it down just to make sure it sticks properly, and I'm going to put masking tape on the back of the sandpaper. I'm informed by those in the know that this gives a much more consistent surface if you put masking tape on both halves. Accelerator on the sandpaper. The problem with putting really coarse sandpaper down is you can't smooth it out with your hands. Well, you can't without taking all your skin off. But it looks like that's stuck. I'm going to glue some blocks on the end of the MDF sanding block, because I realised it's going to be very difficult to pull it out without something to grip onto, because I don't want to push it in further than the sandpaper, because I don't want the edge of the sandpaper against the wheel and it tearing. So just push it in far enough and then pull it back out again, but only as far as these marks here, because then of course the other edge is against the edge of the wheel, and that's the edge that's critical, because I don't want the spinning edge to be hitting at the edge of the sandpaper and possibly tearing it up and the whole thing getting tangled. So what I'm going to do is just quickly glue a couple of handles on the end. Right, let's see how this goes. I'm going to start it up with the sandpaper already under the drum. It won't be touching, and I'm just going to ease it in. I don't want to have to push the sandpaper in against the drum because I don't want that spinning edge to hit the leading edge of the sandpaper in case it just rips it off the base. So I'm going to start it with it already underneath the drum. And there is a danger it's going to push this out, but we'll see. I don't think it's touching at the moment, so let's try it. Let's see how that's performed. There's certainly a bit of dust being generated, so that is starting to look a lot better actually. It's still a little rough on the one side here, but it's very smooth over the entire length of the drum for at least half, 2/3 of the drum. There's this side of the drum is still not being touched, so we've still got a way to go, but it's progressing. Another 15 minutes of sanding and I'm nearly there. There's just a small patch here that hasn't been touched, and the fact that it's in the middle and both ends have now been touched and we're just left with that, I think vindicates that I've got the axle level, which was one of my concerns. Well, when I say level, parallel with the table. So almost there, just that small area to touch and then we're done. Pretty much there. There's just still a tiny patch just here. You can still see that the end grain here, where the low spot hasn't been touched quite as much as the rest, but that's fine. That is a true level drum, lovely and smooth, 40 grit. I don't think there's any reason to go any finer than that. That's great. The purpose of putting varnish on it is just to stabilise the drum. The clamps don't really need varnish. This is my choice of paper. Discussions on forums seem to recommend this. It's a cloth and it's sort of a net, a mesh paper, which I believe is far less likely to clog. Mirka Abranet, but for some reason their name isn't on here. This is also by Mirka. This is a paper-backed Hyomount. I don't think I'd put P40 on this. This was what I was using to level this. I guess you could use paper, but then it's a lot more likely to rip, and I wouldn't want this ripping while it's running at speed. I don't suppose it's going to do too much damage, but once it's ripped, that's it. You've got to change it. This, I think, should last a lot longer. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the diameter I'm going to mark on here, hopefully by using blue pencil I can see it. I'm going to mark the diameter, because what we want is we want this to taper from here to here, so that when we wrap it round we get a nice taper. You'll see what I mean. However, I'm not simply going to draw a line from here to this corner, because the tangent, the hypotenuse, needs to be this length that we've just marked. So actually we need to cut it to somewhere nearer here. So what I've got is, if I put the ruler there, the diameter appears to be, well, I'm going to say exactly 400 millimeters. Maybe it's 399.5 if you're being picky, but let's call it 400. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position the ruler so that the 400 millimeter mark is on the edge of the paper, and I should have done this on the bench really, shouldn't I? Oh well. And draw a line. So what we now have is the diagonal is the circumference of the drum. And one pair of ruined scissors. I use these scissors for cutting sandpaper all the time. I heard one person say that it sharpens the scissors and I shouldn't be worried about cutting sandpaper with them. The guy I met on a trade stand, who I think was an expert on these things, assured me this was not the case. So by tapering the paper like that, what we now have is, when we wrap it round the drum, we have the perfect taper, and it will feed on in a nice spiral. So now we loosen up our clamp. Insert the end underneath. Clamp down. Hopefully that isn't going to stand proud. Yep. Just going to see how tight that is. Yep, that's not going anywhere. Whether or not I should have cut that, actually, you know, I might. I'm going to put more in there. It won't matter if there's a small area that's missing. What I will do, just to make sure there's no possibility of it coming loose, is I will cut it off there. So that we've got a wider portion. There we go, like that. I'll just be a bit more secure. This is where it's going to get a little bit awkward, because I've got to determine how, yeah, it's starting to lock. I need to determine how much. Okay, I've put a mark on both the main body and the end here. And let's just cut that off. In a previous video, somebody asked why I had 4 clamps on this end, every 90 degrees, but only 2 on this end, and the clamps didn't line up. And the reason is because you can't guarantee that when you've spiraled the paper round that it's going to end at a particular point at this end. Now that we've got it true and we know the diameter, and for this 72mm paper, I think it is, it might be 76, what is it? It's 76mm paper, then yeah, I guess we could determine that it's going to finish in a particular position most of the time. But when you're building this, there's no way you're going to know where the end's going to be. I put 2 here because, really speaking, we only need the 1 because we're always going to be starting the paper at one particular point, but actually we need 2 clamps to keep the wheel balanced, to keep the drum balanced. At the other end, I've put 4 in so that we have a fairly good chance of finishing close to one of them. If we only had 2, we might finish halfway around the drum and still have quite a long way to go till the next clamp. Here we've got a little bit more choice. So 4 at this end, but only 2 at that end. And now I've got to wind this all up again and hope that we still finish in the same place. So what we have here is there's a clamp here which we can reach, but of course because it's covered, we can't use that. So now what we have is a clamp that's at 90 degrees, which we can use, although the corner is just slightly covered there, but that's okay. Probably cut it off about here. And I'm fully aware that you probably can't see what I'm doing. Will do. So I don't think it matters that we've got a whole chunk of sandpaper missing there because this bit's in use anyway, and to be honest we're probably not going to be going this wide very rarely anyway, so that should be okay. I kind of feel like there should be some sort of ceremony for what is going to be the first firing up of the completed machine with sandpaper, but here we go. That is exceptionally smooth, and I don't think we need to go through any balancing operation. Even if I tried to balance it, I'm not sure what it would be that I'm trying to do. I'm sure there's probably a very slight unevenness to the weighting of it, but if it's that smooth, how am I going to get it smoother? I can just feel a vague murmur as it's rolling, so I guess no balancing. So if anybody was watching this video to wonder how you balance a drum for a drum sander, I don't know. Piece of wood I'm going to christen this with is a piece of walnut which I've cut on the table saw. So chance to see how good a finish we can get on the rough sawn side and get some of these ruts out of the table sawn side, and see if we can get it. It's fairly regular thickness, but let's see how well this handles it. I think this will only just touch it as it's. Oh, actually, maybe not. Oh, that could be interesting. I think I might just take that down a little bit. Yeah, let's see how that goes. should perhaps mention I'm giving this half a turn at a time. This appears to be a 1.5mm thread, so here it's going to be about 0.75 of a millimetre for each turn. So half a turn, I'm going up by maybe, well, I say half a turn, it's probably not quite half a turn. I'm probably going up by 0.3 of a millimetre each time. Bit too much. It seemed to be slightly higher at this end. There was, no, hang on. Do I mean, yes. There was very little resistance there at all, whereas there is a little bit of resistance here. I'm not quite sure why that would be, other than maybe the table, I don't know. I'm just going to give it another couple of passes. We're getting there. That, remember, was a rough sawn side. It's now becoming really quite smooth. That was already fairly well finished, but there was some big gouges in it. There's still a gouge there. I suppose I ought to carry on until that gouge is gone. So let's just take another 0.5 millimetre off it or something. So here are the results. Lovely and smooth. There was a little bit of a hint of a judder. Possibly you're seeing that here. Feels smooth. I can't see. Sorry, I can't feel any ridges, but there was possibly just a. I guess with a spiral, you're always going to be getting that because it's going to be. There's going to be variation around the drum. Either that or the drum has settled overnight and maybe I need to go through a second truing. Maybe I'm being very picky here because it certainly works. That was the sawn side, and or the rough sawn side, and that's now nice and smooth. And this was the side that had the score marks from the table saw, and that's all lovely and smooth as well. So I would say that is a success. Sandpaper seems to be doing remarkably well, and it isn't getting clogged, which I guess we expected with this Abranet. But I think I've discovered why this end seemed to be tighter. We're a little bit loose here. Down here we're quite tight, but here we're loose. So I think what I need to do is just get this all tightened up, and then I think that issue of it being a little bit tighter here than here will be fine, because this is probably just spinning out as it's spinning, and it's just not in close contact with the drum. So that explains that. So very happy. So there we are. Having tightened the sandpaper around the drum, any concerns I had about this end being higher than that end have gone. It's working brilliantly and the results are fantastic. So I'm blown away by this. It's brilliant. Oh, I love it. Did I just kiss a dust pipe? Oh, the dust extractor, the dust hood, is working brilliantly. There's no dust at all from this. I mean, it helps having a nice powerful dust extractor attached to it, but it's fantastic. So I am a bit obsessive about not creating dust, and this is just perfect. So well happy with that. So that's it. The series is over. My dust, I keep wanting to call it a dust extractor. My drum sander is complete. So Do all the usual YouTube things like liking the video, sharing it, subscribing, and we'll see you back here for more fun projects. Bye!